The sun clawed at the earth, relentless, turning the plains into a cracked mosaic of dust and despair. Amos stood beside his wagon, the wood creaking under the weight of a sky that offered no mercy. His hands calloused and stained with years of toil hung limp at his sides, fingers twitching as if searching for something lost. The air smelled of scorched grass and sweat, and the horizon shimmered like a taunt. His wife's grave lay a mile back, beneath a cottonwood that sagged as if it, too, mourned her passing. He hadn't cried, not yet. The pain sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving, while the world burned on without care. His boots scuffed the dirt as he turned to the wagon, its canvas flap fluttering like a dying bird. The oxen snorted, restless, their ribs sharp against their hides. He hadn't eaten since dawn, hadn't slept in days. Sleep brought dreams of Halila's laughter, her hand brushing his cheek, the way her breath caught when she sang. Now, there was only silence, broken by the wind's low moan. He climbed the wagon step, each movement a labor, when something stirred in the shadow of the wheel, a shape, curled tight, half hidden by dust and burlap. He froze, hand on the knife at his belt, heart thudding like a war drum. That it was a woman, young, maybe 20, her dress torn at the hem, her face smudged with dirt and something darker, grief perhaps, or fear. Her belly swelled beneath the fabric, round and heavy, a promise of life in a place that reeked of death. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared up at him with eyes like a deer caught in a snare. Her hands clutched a small bundle, knuckles white, as if letting go would unravel her entirely. Amos's throat tightened. He wanted to turn away, to climb into the wagon and leave her to the dust. But her gaze held him, raw and unyielding, a mirror to the ache he carried. He crouched, slow, joints protesting. The ground was warm beneath his knees, like it might swallow them both. "You hurt." His voice cracked, unused for days. She shook her head, barely, her lips trembling. A strand of hair clung to her cheek, matted with sweat. He saw no blood, no wounds, but the way she curled into herself told a story of its own. Abandoned, maybe, left behind like so much else in this god-forsaken stretch of earth. He stood, the knife still in his hand, though he didn't know why. The wind hissed, carrying the scent of sage and something sweeter. Her, he realized, a faint trace of lavender beneath the grime. "Get up," he said, softer than he meant. She didn't move, just watched him, her breath shallow. He stepped back, giving her space, and gestured to the wagon. "Ain't safe out here." The words felt hollow, like preaching to a ghost. He didn't know if he meant it for her or himself. She rose, unsteady, one hand braced against her belly, the other clutching that bundle like a lifeline. Her steps were small, deliberate, as if the ground might betray her. Amos held the canvas flap, the fabric rough against his palm, and she climbed inside without a word. The wagon groaned under her weight, and he followed the world outside falling away. Inside, the air was thick, smelling of leather and old grief. He lit a lantern, its glow casting shadows that danced like memories. She sat on a crate, her bundle in her lap, eyes fixed on the floorboards. He saw her now sharp cheekbones, a jaw set hard against whatever had brought her here. He wanted to ask, to know who'd left her, why she'd chosen his wagon, but the questions died in his throat. Instead he pulled a tin of biscuits from a sack, the metal cold against his fingers, and offered it. Her hands shook as she took one, nibbling like a bird, crumbs dusting her skirt. The wagon felt smaller with her in it, the silence louder. He sat across from her, the lantern flickering between them, and thought of Lila, her voice, her warmth, the way she'd filled this space. Now it was just him and this stranger, two broken things under a canvas sky. Outside, the wind howled, relentless, but inside, there was only the sound of her breathing, soft and alive. The lantern's glow wavered, painting the wagon's canvas walls with fleeting ghosts. Amos sat, elbows on his knees, staring at the worn grain of the floorboards. The woman's breathing was a quiet rhythm, steady but fragile, like a sparrow's heartbeat. She hadn't spoken, hadn't offered a name, and he hadn't asked to. The biscuit tin sat between them, untouched now, its lid glinting in the dim light. Outside, the wind scraped at the wagon, clawing like it wanted in. He felt it in his bones, the land's indifference, its hunger for whatever softness remained. His mind drifted, unbidden, to Lila, not the grave, not the dirt he'd shoveled, but her hands, small, strong, kneading dough by firelight, her fingers dusted with flour. They'd been married 6 years, long enough to know each other's silences, short enough to still ache for more. She'd wanted a child, talked of it under starlit skies, her voice bright with hope, but the fever took her before spring left. Him alone with a half-built cabin and dreams that crumbled like ash. He blinked hard, pushing the memory down, but it lingered, sharp as a blade. The woman shifted, her skirt rustling. He glanced up, catching her eyestalk, searching, like they could see the weight he carried. Her bundle rested in her lap, a tattered shawl wrapped tight around something small, a book, maybe, or a keepsake. He didn't ask. Her hand rested on her belly, protective, and he wondered who the father was, where he'd gone. Run off dead. Didn't matter. The planes didn't care for reasons, only consequences. "You got a name?" he said finally, voice low, like he was afraid to break the air. She hesitated, lips parting, then closing, as if the answer cost her something. "Clara," she whispered, barely audible over the wind. Her voice was soft, but there was iron in it, a thread of defiance. He nodded once and let the silence settle again. Names didn't mean much out here, but it was something to hold on to. Like a stone in your pocket, he stood, joints creaking, and rummaged through a crate. Found a blanket, threadbare but clean, and handed it to her. She took it, fingers brushing his, warm despite the chill seeping through the canvas. "Sleep if you can," he said, turning to the wagon's flap. "I'll keep watch." He didn't wait for a reply, stepping out into the night. The air bit at his face, sharp with dust, and cold. Stars blinked above, distant, uncaring. He leaned against the wagon, rifle across his lap, listening to the world's endless complaint. "Clara." The name rolled in his mind, unfamiliar yet heavy. He thought of the last time he'd let someone closely laughing as she braided her hair, teasing him for his crooked smile. He'd been whole then, or close to it. Now, he was a husk, hollowed out by loss, and this woman, this stranger, had stumbled into his path like a test he wasn't ready for. He didn't know if he could trust her, didn't know if he wanted to, but her eyes, that quiet strength, stirred something in him, something he thought had died with Lila. The night stretched on, the wind a low wail. He heard her moving inside, soft sounds of settling, maybe crying. He didn't go to her, didn't know how. Instead, he watched the horizon where the planes met the sky, a line as thin and fragile as hope. He remembered the day Lila fell ill, her skin hot under his palm, her breath ragged. He'd prayed then, to a god he wasn't sure he believed in, but the fever didn't listen, neither did the land. He wondered if Clara prayed, if she had anyone left to pray for. Dawn was hours off, but he felt it coming, a slow bleed of light. That would change nothing. The wagon creaked behind him, and he tightened his grip on the rifle, not for danger, but for something to hold. Clara was alive, breathing, carrying a child. That was more than he had. More than he'd expected to find in this scorched, empty place. The night clung to the plains like a bruise, the air sharp with frost and the faint tang of sage. Amos sat against the wagon wheel, rifle balanced across his knees, the cold seeping through his coat. His breath fogged in the dark, curling upward before the wind tore it away. Inside, Clara was quiet now. No more rustling, no more soft sobs. He wondered if she slept or if she lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling, her thoughts as heavy as his own. The stars above were mercilessly bright, each one a pinprick in the vast, uncaring sky. He hated them tonight, their indifference, a mirror to his own. His mind wandered again, back to the cabin he and Leela had started, half finished, its logs weathered gray. It stood abandoned now, miles back. They'd hauled timber together, her laughter cutting through the ache in his shoulders. She'd painted pictures with her words curtains in the windows, a cradle by the hearth. He'd believed her, believed in her, until the fever stole her breath and left him digging a grave under that cottonwood. The memory was a splinter lodged deep, and every thought of her worked it deeper still. A sound broke his reverie, a soft creak from the wagon. Clara's silhouette appeared at the flap, her blanket draped like a shawl, her face pale in the starlight. She didn't speak, just stood there, one hand on her belly, the other clutching that bundle. Her eyes found his, and for a moment the world shrank to just them, two shadows in a sea of nothing. "Can't sleep," she said, voice barely above a whisper, rough with exhaustion. He nodded, not trusting his own voice, and gestured to the ground beside him. She hesitated, then eased herself down, slow and careful, her breath hitching as she settled. The blanket slipped, revealing the curve of her shoulder, the frayed edge of her dress. Up close, he saw the lines etched around her eyes, too deep for someone so young. Loss, he thought. It marked her as surely as it marked him. You wanted to ask who left you, why you're here, but the words felt like stones, too heavy to lift. Instead, he pulled a flask from his coat, the metal warmed by his body, and offered it. "Water," he said, when her eyes narrowed. She took it, fingers trembling, and sipped, her throat working as she swallowed. "Thank you," she murmured, handing it back. Her voice was stronger now, but still soft, like she was afraid to disturb the night. He capped the flask, the act grounding him, and leaned back. The wagons would hard against his spine. "You don't have to stay out here," she said, after a long silence. "It's cold." He shrugged, the rifle shifting in his lap. Used to it, a lie but easier than the truth. He wasn't guarding her from wolves or bandits, just from himself, from the pull of her presence, the way it stirred things he'd buried. She didn't press, just pulled the blanket tighter. Her breath a faint cloud in the air. The wind dropped, leaving a stillness that felt unnatural, like the land was holding its breath. He glanced at her bundle, still clutched tight, and curiosity got the better of him. "What's that you're holding?" His voice was gruff, almost accusatory, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers tightened around the shawl, then loosened, as if deciding something. "Letters," she said finally. "From my sister. She's gone now." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked away, toward the horizon where the stars met the earth. He nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. Loss was a language they both spoke, fluent and unspoken. He thought of Lila's shawl folded in the wagon, untouched since her death. He hadn't had the heart to give it away, hadn't had the strength to keep it close. "Keep em safe," he said, softer now, and she met his eyes, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. The night stretched on, colder now, and he felt the weight of her beside him, not just her body, but her story, her survival. She was a stranger, yet not. The plains had a way of stripping people down to their bones, and he saw her clearly now, as he saw himself, a soul clinging to something the world wanted to take. Asterisk, asterisk, the stars dimmed as clouds crept across the sky, their edges frayed like torn cloth. Amos felt the air shift, heavier now, carrying the faint scent of rain. The plains stretched endless around them, a vast, unyielding emptiness that swallowed sound and hope alike. Clara sat beside him, her blanket a dark cocoon, her breath steady, but shallow. The silence between them wasn't empty, it hummed with things unsaid, stories too raw to share. He shifted, the rifle cold against his palms, and wondered how long she'd stay, how long he'd let her. Her presence was a weight, not unwelcome but unfamiliar, like a stone in his boot he hadn't decided to shake out. He thought of the days, after Lila's death, when he'd driven the oxen until they faltered, trying to outrun the ache. The wagon had been his refuge then, its creaking rhythm a kind of prayer. Now, with Clara inside it, it felt less like his own. He glanced at her, her profile sharp against the fading starlight, and saw her hand trace slow circles over her belly. The gesture was small, instinctive, but it cut him. Lila had done the same. Once, before the fever took the dream away. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked, voice rough as the dirt beneath them. She didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the plains blurred into shadow. "Not anymore," she said finally, her words soft but heavy, like stones dropped in still water. He nodded, though she didn't see, and let the silence settle again. He understood. The road had a way of stripping destinations from you, leaving only the next step, the next breath. He stood, joints stiff from the cold, and offered his hand. She looked at it, then at him, her eyes searching for something, trust, maybe, or a reason to refuse. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong, and he pulled her up, careful not to let her stumble. Her weight leaned into him for a moment, warm and alive, and he felt a pang, sharp and unbidden. He let go quickly, stepping back, and gestured to the wagon. "Get some rest," he said, turning to scan the darkness, as if danger might give him an excuse to feel less. She climbed inside, the canvas flap falling shut behind her, and he was alone again with the night. The wind picked up, carrying a low moan, and he thought of Lila's voice, singing hymns as she mended his shirt by firelight. He'd never told her how much he loved that sound, how it anchored him. Now, it was gone, and Clara's presence felt like a betrayal, though he couldn't say why. He sat again, rifle across his lap, and let his mind drift to the morning they'd buried Lila. The preacher's words had been hollow, drowned by the wind, and Amos had stood there, dirt under his nails, feeling the earth reject her as it had rejected him. Clara's soft movements inside the wagon pulled him back. He heard the creak of a crate, the rustle of her blanket. She was settling in, claiming a corner of his world, and he didn't know if he resented it or craved it. The thought of her child alive growing stirred something in him, a mix of envy and wonder. He'd wanted that once, a family, a future. Now it was just him and the road, and this stranger who carried both life and loss in her hands. The first drops of rain fell, cold and sharp, tapping the wagon's canvas like fingers testing a drum. He pulled his hat low, the brim shielding his eyes, and thought of the trail ahead. There was a town, maybe 2 days off. If the oxen held, he could leave her there, let her find her own way. But the idea felt wrong, like abandoning a fire in a storm. He didn't know her story, didn't know if she'd run from trouble or been cast out, but her eyes told him she'd fought to survive. That was enough. For now, the rain grew steadier, soaking his coat, and he stood, moving to the wagon's edge. He lifted the flap, peering inside. Clara lay curled on a blanket, her bundle tucked close, her face softened by sleep. For the first time, he saw peace in her, fragile but real. He let the flap fall, the rain a soft curtain between them, and turned back to the night, his heart a little less heavy. Asterisk, asterisk, the rain fell steady now, a soft hiss against the canvas, turning the ground to slick mud under Amos's boots. He stood by the wagon, hat brim dripping, the cold seeping into his bones like an old debt. The night was thick, clouds swallowing the stars, leaving only the lantern's faint glow spilling from a tear in the wagon's flap. Clara slept inside, her breathing a quiet counterpoint to the rain's rhythm. He envied her that rest, the way she'd surrendered to it, as if the world hadn't broken her entirely. His own eyes burned, heavy with days of sleepless grief, but sleep felt like a betrayal, a letting go of Lila's memory. He leaned against the wagon, the wood damp and unyielding, and let his mind wander to the choice ahead. The town was close to days, maybe less, if the rain didn't mire the wheels. He could leave Clara there, find her a boarding house, a church, someone else to carry her burden. The thought was practical, clean, but it sat wrong, like a shirt, buttoned askew. She wasn't his responsibility, yet her presence tugged at him, a thread he couldn't cut. Her eyes, her silence, the way she held that bundle of letters, they spoke of a strength he recognized, a resilience forged in loss. *A memory flickered unbidden. Lila sitting by the fire, her hand stitching a quilt for a child they'd never have. She'd hummed softly, her needle flashing in the light, and he'd watched, mesmerized by her certainty, her hope. He'd wanted to give her that future, to build something lasting. But the fever came, swift and merciless, and all he had left was a grave and a quilt folded in a crate. Clara's child, still unborn, felt like a ghost of that dream, haunting him with what might have been. The rain slowed, leaving a heavy quiet. He climbed into the wagon, careful not to wake her, and sat across from her sleeping form. The lantern cast shadows over her face, softening the lines of worry. Her bundle lay beside her, the shawl loosened, revealing a stack of letters tied with twine. Justice League Darkseid's face, her hand rested on her belly, even in sleep, and he wondered about the child, about the father who wasn't there. He pushed the thought away, his chest tight. Questions were dangerous. They led to answers he wasn't ready for. He pulled the quilt from the crate, Lila's quilt, and draped it over Clara. The fabric settled over her like a sigh, and he froze, his hand lingering on the edge. It was the first time he'd touched it since her death, and the act felt like a confession, a step toward something he couldn't name. He backed away, settling onto a crate, the rifle across his lap. The rain had stopped, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and sage. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and saw Lila's face, her smile fading into the dark. Morning came slow, gray light creeping through the canvas. Clara stirred, blinking awake, her eyes meeting his. She sat up, the quilt sliding to her waist, and touched it, her fingers tracing the stitches. "This yours?" she asked, voice soft with sleep. He nodded, unable to speak. She didn't press, just folded the quilt carefully, her movements deliberate, respectful. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried a weight he hadn't expected. He climbed out, the ground slicked beneath his boots, and checked the oxen. They snorted, restless, as he hitched them up. Clara emerged, her bundle clutched tight, and climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. The silence was easier now, less heavy, as the wagon rolled forward, wheels creaking through the mud. The plains stretched ahead, endless and unforgiving, but the horizon seemed closer, almost touchable. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly, her voice clear despite the rumble of the wagon. He glanced at her, her face turned toward the distance, hair catching the morning light. "Do what?" he asked, though he knew. She didn't answer, just looked at him, her eyes steady, and he felt the question turn inward. Why was he doing this? For her, for himself, for Lila? He gripped the reins tighter, the leather biting his palms, and urged the oxen on. The town lay ahead, a faint smudge against the sky. He could leave her there, let her go. But the thought felt like a wound, raw and open, and he wasn't sure he could close it. Clara's hand rested on her belly, a quiet promise, and he wondered if hope could grow in a place as barren as this. ***. The wagon lurched over the rutted trail, wheels grinding through mud that clung like regret. The sky was a pale bruise, clouds thinning to reveal a sun too weak to warm. Amos held the reins, his knuckles white, the leather worn smooth by years of use. Clara sat beside him, her bundle in her lap, her silence a presence as tangible as the wind. The plains rolled out around them, vast and indifferent, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional skeleton of a tree, stripped bare by time. The town was closer now, a faint haze of smoke on the horizon, promising shelter but no answers. Amos felt the weight of her gaze. Though she looked ahead, her profile sharp against the gray light. Her hands moved restlessly, fingers tracing the twine around her letters, as if anchoring herself to something the world couldn't take. He wondered about those letters, what they held, promises, apologies, or just the ghost of her sister's voice. He didn't ask. Some things were too private, too raw, like the ache in his chest when he thought of Lila's quilt now wrapped around Clara's shoulders. The oxen plodded on, their breath steaming in the chill air. He remembered the first time he'd driven this trail with Lila, her laughter bright as they planned a life in a land that didn't care. She'd pointed at the horizon, naming the future a home, a child, a garden. He'd believed her then, believed in her dreams. Now, the horizon was just a line, and the dreams were buried under a cottonwood tree. Clara's presence stirred that loss, but it also stirred something else, a flicker of purpose. Faint but stubborn, like a spark in damp tinder. "You ever been to this town?" Clara's voice cut through his thoughts. Soft but steady, he shook his head. "Passed through. Once ain't much. Saloon, church, a few stores." She nodded, her eyes on the distance, and he wondered what she was searching for, a place to stay, a new start, or just a moment's rest before the world turned cruel again. He wanted to ask, but the words felt like stones in his mouth, heavy, and useless. The wagon creaked as they hit a dip, and Clara braced herself, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the seat. He noticed the way she moved, careful but strong, like she'd learned to carry pain long before her child. "You don't have to decide now," he said, surprising himself. Her eyes flicked to him, questioning, but he kept his gaze on the oxen, their steady plod, a rhythm he could trust. "About the town," he added, voice gruff. "You can stay on, if you need." She didn't answer, but the silence felt different now, less like a wall and more like a bridge, fragile but holding. The town grew clearer, a cluster of low buildings hunched against the wind, smoke curling from chimneys. He could leave her there, find a preacher or a widow to take her in. It would be simple, clean. But the thought of her walking away, her bundle in hand, her belly round with life, felt like losing something he hadn't known he'd claimed. A memory sick, her hand weak in his, whispering about forgiveness, not for her, but for him, for the guilt he carried like a shadow. He hadn't understood then. But now, with Clara beside him, he wondered if this was what she meant, a chance to carry someone else's weight, to be more than his grief. The wagon rolled past a lone cedar, its branches twisted by years of wind, and he saw it as a sign, though of what, he couldn't say. Clara shifted, her shoulder brushing his, and he felt the warmth of her, alive and real. "I don't know what's next," she said, almost to herself, her voice barely above the creak of the wheels, "but I'm tired of running." He nodded, the words settling deep, and for the first time in months, the road ahead didn't feel so empty. The town loomed closer, its edges sharp in the fading light. Amos tightened his grip on the reins, his heart caught between letting go and holding on. Clara's hand rested on her belly, a quiet vow, and he wondered if redemption could be as simple as this: a stranger, a wagon, a choice to keep going. Asterisk. The town rose from the plains like a scar, its wooden buildings, weathered gray, hunched against the wind. Smoke drifted from a chimney, curling into the dusk like a question unanswered. The wagon creaked to a stop at the edge of the street, the oxen snorting, their breath clouding the air. Amos sat still, reins loose in his hands, the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs. Clara was quiet beside him, her bundle clutched tight, her eyes tracing the town's outline, or saloon's crooked sign, a church steeple leaning slightly, as if tired of standing. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. The rain's ghost, lingering. He felt her watching him, her gaze soft but searching, like she was trying to read the map of his thoughts. He didn't look at her, afraid of what he'd see, hope, maybe, or fear, both too heavy to carry. The street was near empty, save for a man sweeping dust from a porch, his broom's rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Amos could take her there too, that porch, find someone to claim her, to ease the burden of her presence. But his hands stayed still, the reins a lifeline he wasn't ready to release. She shifted, her skirt rustling, and spoke, her voice low but clear. "You don't owe me nothing, Amos." The words were a gift, an absolution, but they stung. He wanted to say he wasn't doing this for her, not entirely, that her being here, alive, breathing, was pulling him from the grave he'd dug for himself, but he only nodded, his throat tight, and climbed down from the wagon. The mud sucked at his boots, grounding him, and he offered his hand. She took it, her grip warm and sure, and stepped down, her belly a quiet promise between them. They stood there, the wagon at their backs, the town before them. A light flickered in a window, warm and distant, and he thought of Lalo, her smile, her hands, the way she'd made every place feel like home. Clara wasn't Lila, but she was here, and that was enough to make the world feel less empty. He gestured toward the church, its steeple a dark silhouette against the fading sky. "They'll take you in," he said, voice rough, "if you want." She looked at the church, then at him, her eyes steady, like she'd made a choice long before this moment. "And if I don't?" she asked, soft but unflinching. The question hung between them, fragile as dawn light, and he felt something shift inside him, a crack in the stone that had settled in his chest. He didn't answer, just turned back to the wagon, unhitching the oxen with hands that moved on. Instinct. She followed, silent, her steps matching his, and they worked together, the rhythm of it natural, like they'd done it 100 times. The night deepened, stars piercing the clouds, their light cold but constant. Amos built a small fire just outside the town's edge, the flames licking at the darkness. Clara sat across from him, the quilt around her shoulders, her letters tucked close. The firelight danced on her face, softening the edges of her grief, and he saw her not as a stranger but as a mirror, someone who'd walked through loss and kept going. He poked at the fire, sparks rising like prayers, and thought of Leela, of the grave under the cottonwood, of the life he'd thought was over. "I'll stay on," Clara said suddenly, her voice a quiet vow. "Till the child comes, at least." He nodded, the words settling like ash, warm and final. The fire crackled, the only sound in the vast silence, and he felt the weight of her choice, the trust in it. The plains stretched around them, endless and unforgiving, but the fire held them, a small circle of light in the dark. Dawn would come soon, its light creeping over the horizon, soft and unyielding. He looked at Clara, her hand on her belly, her eyes on the flames, and felt a stirring, not joy, Not yet, but something close, like the first breath after a long dive. Wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, and he thought of Lila's laughter, faint but alive in him still. The world was harsh, but it was here, and so were they.